Developing criticality in assignments, moving from descriptive to critical writing. Outline. This screencast explores what being more critical means in academic work. You'll have an opportunity to reflect on your own feedback and identify any areas when you can develop your own critical writing. We'll also look at using some resources to help you develop critical vocabulary. And you can practice converting descriptive writing into critical writing. Being critical. What does this mean? You may have come across this phrase already. It's mentioned quite commonly in assessment briefs and learning outcomes. Have a think about what being critical means. It could be that some of these terms you associate with being critical. So, for example, examining things, exploring topics, looking at the detail. It could be that you think of being critical as weighing up ideas, making judgments, or having a balanced discussion. Another aspect of being critical is varied viewpoints, thinking about arguments in your writing, and using evidence. All of these things relate to being critical in some way. Being critical means carefully evaluating information, considering different viewpoints, and making well-reasoned judgments. To develop criticality, you might question assumptions, analyse evidence, and connect ideas to show that you have a thorough understanding of the topic. These are all things that we're going to explore in more detail. Activity. Stop and reflect on assignment feedback that you may have received so far. Looking at your feedback and the comments from your tutor, can you identify points or comments that relate to being critical in some way? Do you understand what the tutor is looking for? See if you can highlight some examples. You can then use some of these suggestions to practice developing critical writing. We'll return to this later. You can pause the screencast at this point if you want to look at your own feedback, and press play when you're ready to continue. You may have paused to have a look at some of your own feedback. Over the next few slides, we'll look at some common comments that you might receive from tutors that all connect to being critical in some way, and break these down so that you understand what they mean. So, for example, you might receive feedback from a tutor which says that you need to break things down a little bit more, or that more analysis is needed. This means exploring a topic more thoroughly by breaking it down into smaller parts and providing more detailed explanations, looking at a particular topic or idea from different angles. So, for example, this might involve breaking down an argument, or maybe breaking down a theory or a model. Some more common feedback might focus on perspectives. So, for example, are there any other perspectives that you can draw on? This means think about other ways to look at the topic. Are there different ideas, opinions, or viewpoints that you can consider in your work? If there are, it'd be useful to represent these in your writing. Another common feedback comment relates to thinking about assumptions or generalizations. So, for example, some feedback might say, your analysis can benefit from a detailed examination of the underlying assumptions of this. What does this mean? This means looking more closely at the basic beliefs that your topic is based on. These beliefs are often not challenged or taken for granted. So, for example, an assumption that students learn best via lectures. What could be the broader generalizations that are made here? Would this apply in all contexts? This type of thinking shows that you are challenging or thinking about underlying assumptions that are connected to a particular topic. Connected to thinking about underlying assumptions, some more feedback that you might receive that relates to criticality is considering the broader context. So, for example, you might have feedback that says, consider the broader context could help your discussion. So what does this mean? This means thinking about the bigger picture and how your topic might connect to it in some way. The broader context could be the wider research field. It could be a social, political, or historical context. It could be in industry trends or shifts. So, for example, technological development. Any changes or shifts, so for example, social changes, might impact on how you view something. So, for example, the relevance of a theory or a model. And finally, another common comment related to being critical is around questioning the sources that you use. So, for example, your feedback might say something like, it would be helpful to question the validity of the sources that you are using. This is especially typical if you're using lots of sources that are research-based, for example. This could mean checking if your sources are reliable and trustworthy. maybe thinking about the credentials of the author or date. Consider if the source that you're using is well supported by evidence, or if there is any potential bias, for example. If you're looking at research, you might also want to explore the methodology and how rigorously the research was conducted. Activity. So far, we've explored some common feedback that you might receive that connects to being critical. So how do you develop your work and move from descriptive writing to critical writing? We're going to start by breaking down a statement. Read the statement on the slide. Consider if the statement on its own demonstrates any critical thinking. You should see the statement now on the screen. Remember that you can pause the screencast whilst you think and press play when you're ready to continue. Exploring this statement. On its own, it's quite simple and it is descriptive. Now try applying some questions to this statement. If you were writing about this topic, what might you need to explore, challenge, or question? Is there anything that you'd need to clarify or that could be open to interpretation? Remember, you can pause whilst you jot down some questions and press play when you're ready to explore. If you've paused at this point, we can now go through some potential questions together. There are a number of things that we might want to unpick here. So, for example, the statement mentions young people, but how is this defined? Could this potentially differ from source to source? Similarly, quite a general statement is made here around many. Is this a bit of an assumption? What do we mean by many? Is there a particular figure that we can use? The statement also hints at time being an important context. So has there been a change or a shift in this particular trend? It also mentions being physically inactive. What could this potentially mean? Could we be more specific here? It also mentions some specific health issues, such as cardiovascular disease and obesity. But where is the evidence for this? So, for example, can you include some evidence and some citations that might illustrate the prevalence? There are some broader questions that we might have too. So, for example, does this statement apply in all contexts? Are we talking about all young people universally? Or are we talking about particular cultures, particular societies, or particular settings? More generally too, do you need to consider what the potential significance of this is, or the implication? These are all examples of critical questions. We've looked at a very simple statement. Now let's have a look at an example of a developed version. Read the statement that appears on the slide and pause if you need to. This revised statement is more critical than the original for several reasons. Firstly, in terms of being specific and context. It provides detailed context about increasing physical activity trends and highlights a specific concern about urban young adults, unlike the original, which is much more general. For evidence and citations, it includes citations to the WHO and Briggs, adding some authority, whereas the original lacks citations altogether. For critical analysis, it acknowledges positive trends whilst pointing out concerns, encouraging deeper analysis, unlike the original, which was a much more straightforward point. For implications, it clearly mentions potential health impacts, making the issue's significance clear, unless the original statement, which was very generalised on this. It's also more engaging, providing specific details and context, prompting further discussion, unlike the original. In summary, this is more critical due to its context, its evidence, its nuanced analysis, and its engagement. So if you are developing your own critical writing, what tools can you use to help you develop your language and critical vocabulary? There are a couple of common resources which are really helpful. The first one is an external resource known as Academic Phrase Bank. This provides structured, adaptable phrases for academic writing. It has different sections relating to different sections of a research paper that you might be writing or a dissertation. You can scan the QR code if you want to find this source. Another source is available on the Study Skills webpage, accessible via the Student Hub. This source is called Signposting Criticality. It includes sentence starters to signal criticality, such things such as introducing limitations, signalling agreement, and addressing counter-arguments. You can access this via the Student Hub pages, or again, you can scan the QR code. These resources might be helpful for the next activity that we're going to complete. Activity. The next slides will look at some different ways that you can turn descriptive writing into critical writing. On the slides, read the original statements. Can you have a go at rewriting some of these statements? You can use some of the vocabulary guides on the previous slides to help you. And remember that you can pause whilst you complete the activity, then press play when you're ready to continue. For each statement, you should see an example on the slide, and we'll talk through these together. Firstly, we'll look at an example of how you might add to a statement to show analysis. This means breaking down information, arguments, or concepts to show that you understand them. You should now see a descriptive statement on the slide. Can you rewrite this to show analysis? You can pause at this point if you want to try. Remember, you can use made-up examples. This isn't about the content, it's just about practicing your writing confidence. Now on the slide, you should see a rewritten example. Again, pause this if you want to read. The second example is much more analytical than the first because it breaks down the concept of remote working into specific benefits, such as flexibility and reduced commuting time. It also explains how these benefits lead to improved work-life balance and increased productivity. It also includes a citation to wider reading to support the claims. This adds some credibility and some depth. This explanation is more detailed, and the evidence makes this second example more informative and critical than the first. Stating the significance means clearly signalling the value or importance of something. Have a look at the simple sentence on the slide. Consider how you could rewrite this to signal that something might be significant and why. In this case, the topic is remote working. Now have a look at the rewritten statement. Again, remember you can pause at this point whilst you read. This statement more clearly highlights the significance of remote working. It identifies key benefits like cost reduction and efficient resource allocation. It shows how these savings can be strategically reinvested in employee development and innovation. Highlighting strengths and weaknesses. This is particularly relevant if you're using sources that are research-based. So you might want to assess the quality and reliability of research, as well as any gaps. You might want to consider how research is conducted, when, and things like the methods and population, and whether this makes the research useful. Have a look at the simple statement made on the slide. This topic is about social interaction in the workplace. Pause whilst you read this, and we'll have a look at a rewritten example that includes some evidence and consideration of strengths and weaknesses. Now on the slide, you should see a rewritten statement. This statement does a little more. It acknowledges the positive impact of workplace social interaction on community and employee satisfaction. It supports this with a citation. It does more though as well. It also critically considers potential bias in the study's self-reported data. The writer could go on to weigh up any other evidence here and use this to inform a conclusion or any recommendations. The final example that we'll look at is synthesizing or making connections between sources. This means connecting what you read and integrating points together. So you might integrate data, information, or different opinions to develop a well-rounded claim or argument about a particular topic. Again, have a look at the descriptive example in the box. Pause this while you consider how this could be rewritten to bring in different points of view. Now on the slide, you should see a rewritten example. Again, you can pause whilst you read this. Have a look at the rewritten example and consider what's been done differently. This rewritten statement draws sources together to support a claim, it highlights subtle differences, and it uses clear linking language to do this. Now that we've had a look at a few examples together, you might want to continue by returning back to your own work. This activity is a reflective activity, so you can complete this now or at a later point. Return to the works that you've already completed. See if you can pick some sentences where you could develop some description into a more critical statement. Practice some critical writing and try using some of the examples that we've looked at for inspiration. You can also use the vocabulary guides signposted in this screencast to help you. Again, you can do this now, or you might want to do this independently. Summary. Being critical means evaluating information, considering varied perspectives, and making reasoned judgments. Develop your critical thinking skills by questioning what you read and looking for assumptions, debates, evidence and implications. To move to critical writing, add analysis to your statements, break down concepts, think about significance, and consider strengths and weaknesses. What next? Visit the Study Skills webpage for resources on critical thinking, reading, and more. Otherwise, you can get in touch with us to book an appointment or for more support. Thank you for watching this screencast.